Part 3. Drasnia. Chapter 17. Dear Aunt Paul, Garion's note began. I know this is going to make you angry, but there's no other way. I have seen the Marin Codex, and now I know what I have to do. He broke off, frowning. How do you spell prophecy? He asked. Belgariad spelled it out for him. Don't drag it out too much, Garion, the old man advised. Nothing you say is going to make her happy about this, so stick to the point. Don't you think I ought to explain why we're doing this? She has read the Codex, Garion. She will know why, without your explanation. I really ought to leave a note for Tenedra, too. Belgariad can tell her what she needs to know. We have things to do, and we cannot afford to spend the whole night on correspondence. I've never written a letter before. It's not nearly as easy as it looks. Just say what you have to say, and then stop, the old man advised. Don't labor at it so much. The door opened, and Silk came back in. He was dressed in the nondescript clothing he had worn on the road, and he carried 2 bundles. I think these should fit you, he said. He handed one of the bundles to Belgariad and the other to Garion. Did you get the money? The old man asked him. I borrowed some from Barak. That's surprising. He is not notorious for his generosity. I didn't tell him I was borrowing it, the little man returned with a broad wink. I thought it would save time if I didn't have to go into long explanations. One of Belgariad's eyebrows shot up. We are in a hurry, aren't we? Silk asked with an innocent expression. And Barak can be so tedious when it comes to money. Spare me the excuses, Belgariad told him. He turned back toward Garion. Have you finished with that yet? What do you think? Garion asked, handing him the note. The old man glanced at it. Good enough. Now sign it. We'll put it where somebody will find it sometime tomorrow. Late tomorrow, Silk suggested. I would like to be well out of Polgara's range when she finds out that we have left. Garion signed the note, folded it, and wrote, For Lady Polgara, across the outside. We'll leave it on the throne, Belgariad said. Let's change clothes and go get the sword. Isn't the sword going to be a bit bulky? Silk asked after Garion and Belgariad had changed. There's a scabbard for it in one of the antechambers, Belgariad answered, opening the door carefully and peering out into the silent hall. He'll have to wear it slung across his back. That glow is going to be a bit ostentatious, Silk said. We will cover the orb. Let's go, Belgariad replied. The 3 of them slipped out into the dimly lighted corridor and crept through the midnight stillness toward the throne room. Once, a sleepy servant going toward the kitchen almost surprised them, but an empty chamber provided them with a temporary hiding place until he had passed. Then they moved on. Is it locked? Silk whispered, when they reached the door to the hall of the Raven King. Garion took hold of the large handle and twisted, wincing as the latch clacked loudly in the midnight stillness. He pushed, and the door creaked as it swung open. You ought to have somebody take care of that, Silk muttered. The orb of Aldur began to glow faintly as soon as the 3 of them entered the hall. It seems to recognize you, Silk observed to Garion. When Garion took down the sword, the orb flared, filling the hall of the Raven King with its deep blue radiance. Garion looked around nervously, fearful that someone passing might see the light and come in to investigate. Stop that, he irrationally admonished the stone. With a startled flicker, the glow of the orb subsided back into a faint, pulsating light, and the triumphant song of the orb stilled to a murmur. Belgariad looked quizzically at his grandson, but said nothing. He led them to an antechamber and removed a long, plain scabbard from a case standing against the wall. The belt attached to the scabbard had seen a certain amount of use. The old man buckled it in place for Geryon, passing it over the young man's right shoulder and down across his chest, so that the scabbard, attached to the belt in 2 places, rode diagonally down his back. There was also a knitted tube in the case, almost like a narrow sock. "Slide this over the hilt," Belgarath instructed. Geryon covered the hilt of his great sword with the tube and then took hold of the blade itself and carefully inserted the tip into the top of the scabbard. It was awkward, and neither Silk nor Belgarath offered to help him. All 3 of them knew why. The sword slid home, and since it seemed to have no weight, it was not too uncomfortable. The crosspiece of the hilt, however, stood out just at the top of his head, and tended to poke him if he moved too quickly. "It wasn't really meant to be worn," Belgarath told him. "We had to improvise." Once again the 3 of them passed through the dimly lighted corridors of the sleeping palace and emerged through a side door. Silk slipped on ahead, moving as soundlessly as a cat and keeping to the shadows. Belgarath and Geryon waited. An open window, perhaps 20 feet overhead, faced out into the courtyard. As they stood together beneath it, a faint light appeared, and the voice that spoke down to them was very soft. "Erend?" it said. "Yes," Geryon replied without thinking. "Everything's all right. Go back to bed." "Belgariad," the child said with a strange kind of satisfaction, and then he added, "Goodbye," in a somewhat more wistful tone, and then he was gone. "Let's hope he doesn't run straight to Polgara," Belgarath muttered. "I think we can trust him, Grandfather. He knew we were leaving, and he just wanted to say goodbye." "Would you like to explain how you know that?" "I don't know," Geryon shrugged. "I just do." Silk whistled from the courtyard gate, and Belgarath and Geryon followed him down into the quiet streets of the city. It was still early spring, and the night was cool but not chilly. There was a fragrance in the air, washing down over the city from the high meadows and the mountains behind Reva, and mingling with the peat smoke and salty tang of the sea air. The stars overhead were bright, and the newly risen moon, looking swollen as it rode low over the horizon, cast a glittering golden path across the breast of the Sea of the Winds. Geryon felt that excitement he always experienced when starting out at night. He had been cooped up too long, and each step that took him farther and farther from the dull round of appointments and ceremonies filled him with an almost intoxicating anticipation. "It is good to be on the road again," Belgarath murmured, as if reading his thoughts. "Is it always like this?" Geryon whispered back. "I mean, even after all of the years that you've been doing it?" "Always," Belgarath replied. "Why do you think I prefer the life of a vagabond?" They moved on down through the dark streets to the city gate and out through a small sallyport to the wharves, jutting into the moon-dappled waters of the harbor. Captain Graldick was a bit drunk when they reached his ship. The vagrant seaman had ridden out the winter in the safety of the harbor at Riva. His ship had been hauled out on the strand, her bottom scraped and her seams recalked. Her mainmast, which had creaked rather alarmingly on the voyage from Cinderia, had been reinforced and fitted with new sails. Then Graldick and his crew had spent much of their time carousing. The effects of the 3 months of steady dissipation showed on his face when they woke him. His eyes were bleary, and there were dark stained pouches under them. His bearded face looked puffy and unwell. "Maybe tomorrow," he grunted when Belgarath told him of their urgent need to leave the island. "Or the next day." "The next day would be better, I think." Belgarath spoke more firmly. "My sailors couldn't possibly man the oars," Graldick objected. "They'll be throwing up all over the deck. Takes a week to clean up a mess like that." Belgarath delivered a blistering ultimatum then, and Graldick sullenly climbed out of his rumpled bunk. He lurched toward the crew's quarters, pausing only long enough to be noisily sick over the rail, and then he descended into the forward hold, where with kicks and curses he roused his men. The moon was high and dawn only a few hours off when Graldic's ship slid quietly out of the harbor and met the long rolling swells of the Sea of the Winds. When the sun came up, they were far out at sea. The weather held fair, even though the winds were not favorable, and in 2 days' time Graldic dropped Geryon, Silk, and Belgarath off on a deserted beach just north of the mouth of the Saline River on the northwest coast of Sindaria.
"I don't know that I'd be in all that big a hurry to go back to Reva," Belgarath told Graldic, as he stepped out of the small boat onto the sand of the beach. He handed the bearded Carrick a small pouch of jingling coins. "I'm sure you and your crew can find a bit of a diversion somewhere." "It's always nice in Kamar this time of year," Graldic mused, bouncing the pouch thoughtfully in his hand. "And I know a young widow there who's always been very friendly." "You ought to pay her a visit," Belgarath suggested. "You have been away for quite some time, and she's sure to have been terribly lonely for you."
"I think maybe I will," Graldic said, his eyes suddenly bright. "Have a good trip." He motioned to his men, and they began rowing the small boat back toward the lean ship standing a few hundred yards offshore.
"What was that all about?" Geryon asked.
"I would like to get a bit of distance between us and Polgara before she gets her hands on Graldic," the old man replied. "I do not particularly want her chasing us." He looked around. "Let's see if we can find somebody with a boat to row us upriver to Saline. We should be able to buy horses and supplies there."
A fisherman, who immediately saw that turning ferry boatman would provide a more certain profit than trusting his luck on the banks of the northwest coast, agreed to take them upriver. By the time the sun was setting, they had arrived in the city of Saline. They spent the night in a comfortable inn, and went the following morning to the central market. Silk negotiated the purchase of horses, haggling down to the last penny, bargaining more out of habit, Geryon thought, than out of any real necessity. Then they bought supplies for the trip. By mid-morning they were pounding along the road that led toward Darin, some 40 leagues distant. The fields of northern Sindaria had begun to sprout that first green blush that lay on damp earth like a faint jade mist, and more than anything announced spring. A few fleecy clouds scampered across the blue of the sky, and though the wind was gusty, the sun warmed the air. The road opened before them, stretching across the verdant fields, and though their mission was deadly serious, Geryon almost wanted to shout out of pure exuberance. In 2 more days they reached Darin.
"Do you want to take ship here?" Silk asked Belgarath, as they crested the hill up which they had come so many months before with their 3 wagon-loads of turnips.
"We could be in Kotu inside of a week." Belgarath scratched at his beard, looking out at the expanse of the Gulf of Carrick, glittering in the afternoon sun.
"I don't think so,"
he decided. He pointed at several lean Carrick warboats patrolling just outside Sindarian territorial waters.
"The Carricks are always moving around out there," Silk replied. "It might have nothing whatsoever to do with us."
"Polgara's very persistent," Belgarath said. "She cannot leave Reva herself as long as so many things are afoot there, but she can send people out to look for us. Let's avoid any possible trouble if we can. We'll go along the north coast, and then on up through the fens to Boktor."
Silk gave him a look of profound distaste.
"It will take us a lot longer," he objected.
"We are not in all of that great of a hurry," Belgarath remarked blandly. "The Alorns are beginning to mass their armies, but they still need more time, and it is going to take a while to get the Arryns all moving in the same direction."
"And what has that got to do with it?" Silk asked him.
I have plans for those armies, and I'd like to start them moving before we cross into Gorognadrak, if possible, and certainly before we get to Meloria. We can afford the time it will take to avoid any unpleasantness with the people Polgaraz sent out to find us."
And so they detoured around Darin, and took the narrow, rocky road that led along the cliffs where the waves crashed and boomed and foamed, beating themselves to fragments against the great rocks of the north coast. The mountains of eastern Sindaria ran down into the Gulf of Kerak, along that forbidding shore, and the road which twisted and climbed and dropped steeply again. It was not a good road, Silk grumbled every mile of the way. Geryon, however, had other worries. The decision he had made after reading the Mren Codex had seemed quite logical at the time, but logic was scant comfort now. He was deliberately riding toward Meloria to face Torak in a duel. The more he thought about it, the more insane it seemed. How could he possibly hope to defeat a god? He brooded about that as they rode eastward along the rocky coast, and his mood became as unpleasant as Silk's. After about a week, the cliffs became lower, and the land more gently rolling. From the top of the last of the eastern foothills they looked out and saw what appeared to be a vast flat plain, dark green and very damp-looking. "Well, there they are," Silk sourly informed Belgarath.
"What has got you so bad-tempered?" the old man asked him.
"One of the main reasons I left Drasnia in the first place was to avoid the possibility of ever being obliged to go anywhere near the Fens," Silk replied crisply. "And now you propose to drag me lengthwise through the whole soggy, stinking expanse of them. I am bitterly disappointed in you, old friend, and it's altogether possible that I will never forgive you for this."
Geryon was frowning at the marshland spread out below them.
"That wouldn't be Drasnia, would it? I thought that Drasnia was farther north."
"It is Algaria, actually," Belgarath told him. "The beginning of Aldorfens. Up beyond the mouths of the Aldur River is the Drasnian border. They call it Bryn Marsh up there, but it's all the same swamp. It goes on for another 30 leagues or so beyond Kotu, at the mouth of the Mrin River."
"Most people just call it the Fens, and let it go at that," Silk observed. "Most people have sense enough to stay out of it," he added pointedly.
"Oh, quit complaining so much," Belgarath told him bluntly. "There are fishermen along this coast. We'll buy a boat."
Silk's eyes brightened. "We can go up along the coast, then," he suggested.
"That would not be very prudent," Belgarath disagreed. "Not with Anheg's fleet scouring the Gulf of Sharek looking for us."
"You do not know that they are looking for us," Silk said quickly.
"I know Polgara," Belgarath answered.
"I feel that this trip is definitely growing sour on us," Silk grumbled. The fishermen along the marshy coast were a peculiar mixture of Algars and Drasnians, close-mouthed and wary of strangers. Their villages were built on pilings driven deep into the marshy earth, and there lingered about them that peculiar odor of long-dead fish that hovers over fishing villages wherever one finds them. It took some time to find a man with a boat he was willing to sell, and even longer to persuade him that 3 horses and a few silver coins, beside, was a fair price for it. "It leaks," Silk declared, pointing at the inch or so of water that had collected in the bottom of the boat as they poled away from the reeking village.
"All boats leak, Silk," Belgarath replied calmly. "It is the nature of boats to leak. Bail it out."
"It will just fill up again."
"Then you can bail it out again. Try not to let it get too far ahead of you."
The fens stretched on interminably, a wilderness of cattails and rushes and dark, slow-moving water. There were channels and streams and, quite frequently, small lakes, where the going was much easier. The air was humid, and, in the evenings, thick with gnats and mosquitoes. Frogs sang of love all night, greeting spring with intoxicated fervor. Little chirping frogs and great booming, bull-voiced frogs, as big as dinner plates. Fish leaped in the ponds and lakes, and beaver and muskrats nested on soggy islands. They poled their way through the confused maze of channels, marking the mouths of the Alder, and continued northeasterly in the slowly warming northern spring. After a week or more, they crossed the indeterminate border and left Belgariad behind. A false channel put them aground once, and they were obliged to climb out to heave and push their boat off a mud bank by main strength. When they were afloat again, Silk sat disconsolately on the gunwale, regarding his ruined boots that were dripping thick mud into the water. When he spoke, his voice was filled with profound disgust. "Delightful," he said. "How wonderful to be home again, in dear old mucky Drasnia." Chapter 18. Although it was all one vast swampland, it seemed to Geryon that the fens here in Drasnia were subtly different from those farther south. The channels were narrower, for one thing, and they twisted and turned more frequently. After a couple of days of poling, he developed a growing conviction that they were lost. "Are you sure you know where we're going?" he demanded of Silk. "I haven't the vaguest idea," Silk replied candidly. "You keep saying that you know the way everywhere." "There isn't any certain way here in the fens, Geryon. All you can do is to keep going against the current and hope for the best." "There's got to be a route. Why don't they put up markers or something?" "It wouldn't do any good. Look." The little man put his pole against a solid-looking hummock rising out of the water beside the boat, and pushed. The hummock moved sluggishly away. Geryon stared at it in amazement. "It is floating vegetation," Belgarath explained, stopping his poling to wipe the sweat from his face. "Seeds fall on it, and it grows grass just like solid earth, except that it's not solid. It floats wherever the wind and the current push it. That's why there aren't any permanent channels, and there is no definite route." "It is not always just wind and current," Silk added darkly. He glanced out at the lowering sun. "We had better find something solid to tie up to for the night," he suggested. "How about this one?" Belgarath replied, pointing at a brushy hummock that was somewhat higher than those surrounding it. They poled their way to the clump of ground rising out of the surrounding water, and Silk kicked at it experimentally a few times. "It seems to be stationary," he confirmed. He stepped out of the boat and climbed to the top, frequently stamping his feet. The ground responded with a satisfactorily solid sound. "There's a dry spot up here," he reported, "and a pile of driftwood on the other side. We can sleep on solid ground for a change, and maybe even have a hot meal." They pulled the boat far up onto the sloping side, and Silk took some rather exotic-seeming precautions to make certain that it was securely tied. "Isn't that sort of unnecessary?" Geryon asked him. "It isn't much of a boat," Silk replied, "but it is the only one we've got. Let's not take chances with it." They got a fire going, and erected their single tent as the sun slowly settled in a cloud bank to the west, painting the marsh in a ruddy glow. Silk dug out a few pans and began to work on supper. "It's too hot," Geryon advised critically, as the rat-faced little man prepared to lay strips of bacon in a smoking iron pan. "Do you want to do this?" "I was just warning you, that's all." "I don't have your advantages, Geryon," Silk replied tartly. I didn't grow up in Polgareth's kitchen the way you did. I just make do the best I can. You don't have to be grumpy about it. I just thought you'd like to know that the pan's too hot. I think that I can manage without any more advice. Suit yourself, but you are going to burn the bacon. Silk gave him an irritated look and started slapping bacon slices into the pan. The slices sizzled and smoked, and their edges turned black almost immediately. I told you so, Garion murmured.
Belgarath,
Silk complained. Make him leave me alone.
Come away, Garion. He can burn supper without any help.
Oh, thanks, Silk responded sarcastically. Supper was not an absolute disaster. After they had eaten, they sat watching as the fire burned down and purple evening crept across the fens. The frogs took up their vast chorus among the reeds, and birds perched on the bending stalks of cattails, clucking and murmuring sleepily. There were faint splashes and rippling sounds in the brown water about them, and occasional eruptions of bubbles as swamp gas gurgled to the surface. Silk sighed bitterly. I hate this place. I absolutely hate it. That night, Garion had a nightmare. It was not the first he had suffered since they had left Riva, and as he sat up, sweat-drenched and trembling, he was positive it would not be the last. It was not a new nightmare, but rather was one which had periodically haunted his sleep since boyhood. Unlike an ordinary bad dream, this one did not involve being chased or threatened, but consisted rather of a single image, the image of a hideously maimed face. Although he had never actually seen the owner of the face, he knew exactly whose face it was. And now he knew why it had inhabited his darkest dreams. The next day dawned cloudy with a threat of approaching rain. As Belgarath stirred up the fire and Silk rummaged through his pack for something suitable for breakfast, Garion stood looking out at the swamp around them. A flight of geese swept by overhead in a ragged V, their wings whistling and their muted cries drifting lonely and remote. A fish jumped not far from the edge of the hummock, and Garion watched the ripples widening out toward the far shore. He looked for quite some time at that shore before he realized exactly what it was he was seeing. Concerned, then a bit alarmed, he began to peer first this way and then that. "Grandfather, look!"
"At what?"
"It's all changed. There aren't any channels anymore. We're in the middle of a big pond. There isn't any way out of it." He spun around, desperately trying to see some exit, but the edges of the pond in which they sat were totally unbroken. There were no channels leading out of it, and the brown water was absolutely still, showing no evidence of current. Then, in the center of the pond, without making so much as a ripple, a round, furred head emerged from the water. The animal's eyes were very large and bright. It had no external ears, and its little nose was as black as a button. It made a peculiar chirping noise, and another head emerged out of the water a few feet away. "Finlings," Silk gasped, drawing his short sword with a steely rustle.
"Oh, put that away,"
Belgarath told him disgustedly.
"They aren't going to hurt you."
"They have trapped us, haven't they? What do they want?" "Breakfast, obviously," Silk answered, still holding his sword.
"Don't be stupid, Silk. Why would they want to eat a raw Drasnian when there is a whole swamp full of fish available? Put the sword away."
The first finling, which had poked its head up out of the water, lifted one of its webbed forefeet and made a peremptory gesture. The webbed foot was strangely hand-like.
"They seem to want us to follow them,"
Belgarath said calmly. "And you are going to do it?" Silk was aghast. "Are you mad?"
"Do we have any choice?"
Without further discussion, Belgarath began taking down the tent. "Are they monsters, grandfather?" Garion asked worriedly, as he helped. "Like Algroths or trolls?"
"No. They are just animals, like seals or beaver. They are curious and intelligent and very playful."
"But they play very nasty games," Silk added. After they had stowed all of their packs into the boat, they pushed it down the bank into the water. The Finlings watched them curiously, with no particular threat or malice in their gaze, but rather a kind of firm determination on their furry little faces. The solid-looking edge of the pond opened then to reveal the channel that had been concealed during the night. The strangely rounded head of the Finling who had gestured to them moved on ahead, leading the way and glancing back often to be certain that they were still following. Several others trailed after the boat, their large eyes alert. It began to rain, a few drops at first, and then a steady drizzle that veiled the endless expanse of reed and cattail stretching out on all sides of them. "Where do you think they are taking us?" Silk asked, stopping his poling to wipe the rain out of his face. One of the Finlings behind the boat chattered angrily at him until he dug his pole into the muddy bottom of the channel again.
"We'll just have to wait and see," Belgarath replied.
The channel continued to open before them, and they poled steadily along, following the round-headed Finling who had first appeared. "Are those trees up ahead?" Silk asked, peering into the misty drizzle.
"It appears so. I suspect that's where we are going."
The large cluster of trees slowly emerged from the mist. As they drew closer, Garion could see a gentle rise of ground swelling up out of the reeds and water. The grove, which crowned the island, appeared to be mostly willows with long, trailing branches. The Finling, who had been leading them, swam on ahead. When it reached the island, it emerged half out of the water and gave a strange, whistling cry. A moment or so later, a hooded figure stepped out of the trees and moved slowly down to the bank. Garion did not know what to expect, but he was more than a little startled when the brown-cloaked figure on the shore pushed back the hood to reveal a woman's face that, though very old, still bore the luminous traces of what had once been an extraordinary beauty.
"Hail, Belgarath,"
she greeted, in an oddly neutral voice.
"Hello, Vordai," he replied conversationally. "It has been quite a while, hasn't it?"
The little creatures that had guided them to the island waded out of the water to gather around the brown-cloaked woman. They chirped and chattered to her, and she looked at them fondly, touching their wet fur with gentle fingers. They were medium-sized animals with short hind legs and little rounded bellies, and they walked upright with a peculiar quick shuffle, their forepaws held delicately in front of their furry chests.
"Come inside, out of the rain, Belgarath," the woman said. "Bring your friends."
She turned and walked up a path leading into the willow grove with her Finlings scampering along beside her.
"What do we do?"
Garion whispered.
"We go inside,"
Belgarath replied, stepping out of the boat onto the island. Garion was not sure what to expect as he and Silk followed the old man up the path toward the dripping willows, but he was totally unprepared for the neat thatch-roofed cottage with its small adjoining garden. The house was built of weathered logs, tightly chinked with moss, and a wispy tendril of smoke drifted from its chimney. At the doorway, the woman in brown carefully wiped her feet on a rush mat and shook the rain out of her cloak. Then she opened the door and went inside without looking back. Silk's expression was dubious as he stopped outside of the cottage. "Are you sure this is a good idea, Belgarath? I have heard stories about Vordai."
"It is the only way to find out what she wants," Belgariad told him. "And I'm very sure we aren't going any farther until we talk with her. Let's go in. Be sure to wipe your feet."
The interior of Vordai's cottage was scrupulously neat. The ceilings were low and heavily beamed. The wooden floor was scrubbed to whiteness, and a table and chairs sat before an arched fireplace, where a pot hung in the flames from an iron arm. There were wildflowers in a vase on the table, and curtains at the window overlooking the garden.
"Why don't you introduce your friends to me, Belgariad?"
the woman suggested, hanging her cloak on a peg. She smoothed the front of her plain brown dress.
"As you wish, Vordai," the old man replied politely. "This is Prince Keldar, your countryman, and this is King Belgariad of Reva."
"Noble guests,"
the woman observed, in that strangely neutral voice.
"Welcome to the house of Vordai."
"Forgive me, madam," Silk said, in his most courtly manner, "but your reputation seems to be grossly inaccurate."
"Vordai? The Witch of the Finns?" she asked, looking amused. "Do they still call me that?"
He smiled in return. "Their descriptions are misleading, to say the least."
"The Hag of the Swamps,"
she mimicked the speech of a credulous peasant.
"Drowner of travellers, and Queen of the Findlings."
There was a bitter twist to her lips. "That's more or less what they would say," he told her. "I always believed you were a myth, conjured up to frighten unruly children."
"Vordai will get you and gobble you up,"
she laughed, but there was no humor in her laughter.
"I have been hearing that for generations. Take off your cloaks, gentlemen. Sit down. Make yourselves comfortable. You will be staying for a while."
One of the Finlings, the one who had led them to the island, Garion thought, chattered at her in a piping little voice, glancing nervously at the pot hanging in the fire.
"Yes," she answered quite calmly. "I know that it's boiling, Tupik. It has to boil or it won't cook." She turned back to her guests. "Breakfast will be ready in a bit. Tupik tells me you have not eaten yet."
"You can communicate with them?" Silk sounded surprised.
"Isn't that obvious, Prince Keldar? Here, let me hang your cloaks by the fire to dry."
She stopped and regarded Garion gravely.
"So great a sword for one so young," she noted, looking at the great hilt rising above his shoulder. "Stand it in the corner, King Belgariad. There's no one to fight here."
Garion inclined his head politely, unbuckled the sword belt, and handed her his cloak. Another, somewhat smaller Finling darted out of a corner with a piece of cloth and began busily wiping up the water that had dripped from their cloaks, chattering disapprovingly all the while.
"You'll have to forgive Poppy," Vordai smiled. "She is obsessed with tidiness. I sometimes think that if I left her alone she would sweep holes in the floor."
"They are changing, Vordai,"
Belgariad said gravely, seating himself at the table.
"I know," she replied,
going to the fireplace to stir the bubbling pot.
"I have watched them over the years. They are not the same as they were when I came here."
"It was a mistake to tamper with them."
"So you have said before. You and Polgara both. How is she, by the way?"
"Probably raging by now. We slipped out of the citadel at Reva without telling her we were leaving, and that sort of thing irritates her."
"Polgara was born irritable."
"We agree on that point, anyway."
"Breakfast is ready."
She lifted the pot with a curved iron hook and set it on the table. Poppy scampered over to a cupboard standing against the far wall and brought back a stack of wooden bowls, then returned for spoons. Her large eyes were very bright, and she chittered seriously at the three visitors.
"She's telling you not to drop crumbs on her clean floor,"
Vordai advised them, removing a steaming loaf of bread from an oven built into the side of the fireplace.
"Crumbs infuriate her."
"We will be careful," Belgarath promised. It was a peculiar sort of breakfast, Geryon thought. The stew that came steaming from the pot was thick, with strange vegetables floating in it, and large chunks of fish. It was delicately seasoned, however, and he found it delicious. By the time he had finished eating, he rather reluctantly concluded that Vordai might even be as good a cook as Aunt Paul.
"Excellent, Vordai,"
Belgarath complimented her, finally pushing his bowl away.
"Now, suppose we get down to business. Why did you have us brought here?"
"To talk, Belgarath. I don't get much company, and conversation's a good way to pass a rainy morning. Why have you come into the Finns?"
"The prophecy moves on, Vordai, even if sometimes we don't. The Raven King has returned, and Torax stirs in his sleep."
"Ah,"
she said, without much real interest.
"The orb of Audor stands on the pommel of Belgarian's sword. The day is not far off, when the Child of Light and the Child of Dark must meet. We go toward that meeting, and all mankind awaits the outcome."
"Except me, Belgarath."
She gave him a penetrating look.
"The fate of mankind is a matter of only the mildest curiosity to me. I was excluded from mankind 300 years ago, you'll remember."
"Those people are all long dead, Vordai."
"Their descendants are no different. Could I walk into any village in this part of Drasnia and tell the good villagers who I am, without being stoned or burned?"
"Villagers are the same the world over, madam," Silk put in. "Provincial, stupid, and superstitious. Not all men are like that."
"All men are the same, Prince Keldar," she disagreed. "When I was young, I tried to involve myself in the affairs of my village. I only wanted to help. But very soon not a cow died or a baby took colic without my being blamed for it. They stoned me finally, and tried to drag me back to the village to burn me at the stake. They had quite a celebration planned. I managed to escape. I took refuge in the Finns. After that I had very little interest in the affairs of men."
"You probably should not have displayed your talents quite so openly. People prefer not to believe in that sort of thing," Belgarath told her. "There is a whole catalogue of nasty little emotions curdling in the human spirit, and anything the least bit out of the ordinary raises the possibility of retribution."
"My village learned that it was more than a possibility,"
she replied, with a certain grim satisfaction.
"What happened?"
Geryon asked curiously.
"It started raining,"
Vordai told him, with an odd smile.
"Is that all?" "It was enough. It rained on that village for 5 years, King Belgarian. Just on the village. 100 yards beyond the last house, everything was normal. But in the village, there was rain. They tried to move twice, but the rain followed them. Finally, they gave up and left the area. For all I know, some of their descendants are still wandering."
"You're not serious," Silk scoffed.
"Quite serious."
She gave him an amused look.
"Your credulity appears selective, Prince Keldar. Here you are, going about the world in the company of Belgariad, the sorcerer. I am sure that you believe in his power, but you cannot bring yourself to accept the idea of the power of the witch of the fens."
Silk stared at her.
"I really am a witch, Prince Keldar. I could demonstrate if you wish, but I don't think you'd like it very much. People seldom do."
"It isn't really necessary, Vordai. What is it that you want exactly?"
"I was coming to that, Belgariad. After I escaped into the fens, I discovered my little friends here."
She affectionately stroked the side of Poppy's furry little face, and Poppy nuzzled at her, ecstatically.
"They were afraid of me at first, but they finally grew less shy. They began bringing me fish and flowers as tokens of friendship. And I needed friends very badly at that time. I altered them a bit out of gratitude."
"You shouldn't have, you know," the old man said rather sadly.
She shrugged.
"Should. Shouldn't. They have very little meaning to me anymore."
"Not even the gods would do what you did."
"The gods have other amusements."
She looked directly at him then.
"I have been waiting for you, Belgariad, for years now. I knew that sooner or later you would come back into the fens. This meeting you spoke of is very important to you, isn't it?"
"It is the most important event in the history of the world."
"That depends on your point of view, I suppose. You need my help, though."
"I think we can manage, Vordai."
"Perhaps. But how do you expect to get out of the fens?"
He looked at her sharply.
"I can open the way for you to the dry ground at the edge of the swamp. Or I can see to it that you wander around in these marshes forever, in which case this meeting you are concerned about will never happen, will it? That puts me in a very interesting situation, wouldn't you say?"
Belgariad's eyes narrowed.
"I discovered that when men deal with each other, there is usually an exchange of some kind," she added, with a strange little smile. "Something for something, nothing for nothing. It seems to be a sensible arrangement."
"Exactly what did you have in mind?"
"The Finlings are my friends. In a very special way, my children. But men look upon them as animals with pelts worth the taking. They trap them, Belgariad, and they kill them for their fur. The fine ladies in Bachtor and Kotu dress themselves in the skins of my children, giving no thought to the grief it causes me. They call my children animals, and they come into the fens to hunt them."
"They are animals, Vordai,"
he told her gently.
"Not anymore."
Almost without seeming to think, Vordai put her arm about Poppy's shoulders.
"It may be that you were right when you said that I should not have tampered with them. But it is too late now to change it back."
She sighed then.
"I am a witch, Belgariad, not a sorceress. My life has a beginning and an end, and it is approaching its end, I think. I won't live forever, as you and Polgara have. I have lived several hundred years already, and I'm growing very tired of life. As long as I am alive, I can keep men from coming into the fens. But once I am gone, my children will have no protection."
"And you want me to take them into my care?"
"No, Belgariad. You are too busy, and sometimes you forget promises you don't care to remember. I want you to do the one thing that will make it forever impossible for men to think of the Fenlings as animals."
His eyes widened as what she was suggesting dawned on him.
"I want you to give my children the power of speech, Belgarath,"
Vordai said.
"I cannot do it. My witchcraft does not reach that far. Only a sorcerer can make it possible for them to talk."
"Vordai!"
"That is my price, Belgarath. That's what my help will cost you. Take it, or leave it."
Chapter 19. They slept that night in Vordai's cottage, though Garion slept very little. The ultimatum of the Witch of the Fens troubled him profoundly. He knew that tampering with nature had far-reaching effects, and to go as far as Vordai wished might forever erase the dividing line between men and animals. The philosophical and theological implications of that step were staggering. There were, moreover, other worries. It was entirely possible that Belgarath could not do what Vordai demanded of him. Garion was almost positive that his grandfather had not attempted to use his will since his collapse months before, and now Vordai had set him an almost impossible task. What would happen to Belgarath if he tried and failed? What would that do to him? Would the doubts then take over and rob him of any possibility of ever regaining his power? Desperately, Garion tried to think of a way to warn his grandfather without arousing those fatal doubts. But they absolutely had to get out of the Fens. However reluctantly Garion had made the decision to meet Torak, he now knew that it was the only possible choice open to him. The meeting, however, could not be delayed indefinitely. If it were put off too long, events would move on, and the world would be plunged into the war they were all so desperately trying to head off. Vordai's threat to trap them all here in the Fens unless Belgarath paid her price threatened not only them, but the entire world. In a very real sense, she held the fate of all mankind in her uncaring hands. Try though he might, Garion could not think of any way to avoid the test of Belgarath's will. Though he would reluctantly have done what Vordai wished himself, he did not even know where to begin. If it could be done at all, his grandfather was the only one who could do it. If his illness had not destroyed his power. When dawn crept through the misty fens, Belgarath arose and sat before the fire, brooding into the crackling flames with a somber face.
"Well?"
Vordai asked him.
"Have you decided?"
"It is wrong, Vordai. Nature cries out against it."
"I am much closer to nature than you are, Belgarath. Witches live more intimately with her than sorcerers do. I can feel the turning of the seasons in my blood, and the earth is alive under my feet. I hear no outcry. Nature loves all her creatures, and she would grieve over the obliteration of my Fenlings almost as much as I. But that's really beside the point, isn't it? Even though the very rocks shrieked out against it, I would not relent."
Silk exchanged a quick look with Garion, and the little man's sharp face seemed as troubled as Belgarath's.
"Are the Fenlings really beasts?"
Vordai continued. She pointed to where Poppy still slept, her delicate forepaws open like little hands. Tupek, moving stealthily, crept back into the house carrying a handful of dew-drenched swamp flowers. With precise care he placed them about the slumbering Poppy, and gently laid the last one in her open palm. Then, with an oddly patient expression, he sat on his haunches to watch her awakening. Poppy stirred, stretched, and yawned. She brought the flower to her little black nose and sniffed at it, looking affectionately at the expectant Tupik. She made a happy little chirping sound, and then she and Tupik scampered off together for a morning swim in the cool water of the swamp.
"It is a courting ritual,"
Vordai explained.
"Tupik wants Poppy to be his mate, and as long as she continues to accept his gifts, he knows that she is still fond of him. It will go on for quite some time, and then they will swim off into the swamp together for a week or so. When they come back, they will be mates for life. Is that really so different from the way young humans behave?"
Her question profoundly disturbed Geryon for some reason that he could not quite put his finger on.
"Look there,"
Vordai told them, pointing through the window at a group of young fenlings, scarcely more than babies, at play. They had fashioned a ball out of moss and were rapidly passing it around in a circle, their large eyes intent on their game.
"Could not a human child join that group and not feel the slightest bit out of place?"
Not far beyond the game, a mature female fenling cradled her sleeping baby, rocking gently with her cheek against the little one's face.
"Is not motherhood universal?"
Vordai asked.
"In what way do my children differ from humans, except that they are perhaps more decent, more honest and loving with each other?"
Belgarath sighed. "All right, Vordai. You have made your point. I will grant that the fenlings are probably nicer creatures than men. I don't know that speech will improve them. But if that's what you want—" He shrugged.
"You'll do it, then?"
"I know it is wrong, but I will try to do what you ask. I really don't have much choice, do I?"
"No, you don't. Will you need anything? I have all of the customary implements and compounds."
He shook his head. "Sorcery does not work that way. Witchcraft involves the summoning of spirits, but sorcery comes all from within. Someday, if we have the leisure, I'll explain the difference to you." He stood up then. "I don't suppose you would care to change your mind about this?" Her face hardened.
"No, Belgarath."
He sighed again. "All right, Vordai. I'll be back in a bit." He turned quietly and walked out into the mist-shrouded morning. In the silence that followed his departure, Geryon closely watched Vordai for some hint that her determination might not be as iron-hard as it seemed. It had occurred to him that if she were not blindly adamant, he might be able to explain the situation and persuade her to relent. The Witch of the Fens paced nervously about the room, picking things up absently and setting them down again. She seemed unable to concentrate her attention on any one thing for more than a moment.
"This may ruin him, you know,"
Geryon told her quietly. Bluntness, perhaps, might sway her where other attempts at persuasion had failed.
"What are you talking about?"
"He was very ill last winter. He and Kluchik fought each other for possession of the orb," Geryon replied. "Kluchik was destroyed, but Belgarath nearly died too. It's quite possible that his power was destroyed by his illness." Silk's gasp was clearly audible. "Why didn't you tell us?" he exclaimed.
"Aunt Paul said that we didn't dare. We couldn't take any chance of word of it getting back to the Angarax. Belgarath's power is the one thing that has held them in check all of these years. If he has lost it, and they find out, they will feel free to invade the West."
"Does he know?" Vordai asked quickly.
"I don't think so. Neither one of us said anything to him about it. We couldn't let him think for a moment that anything might be wrong. If he has one single doubt, it won't work for him.
That's the main thing about sorcery. You have to believe that what you want to happen is going to, otherwise nothing happens at all. And each time you fail, it gets worse. What did you mean when you said that this might ruin him?
Vordai's face looked stricken, and Geryon began to have some hope.
He may still have his power, or some of it, but not enough to do what you have asked of him. It takes a tremendous effort to do even simple things, and what you have asked him to do is very difficult. It could be too much for him. But once he starts, he won't be able to stop. And the effort may drain his will and his life energy until he cannot ever recover, or until he dies. Why didn't you tell me?
Vordai demanded, her face anguished.
I couldn't. Not without his hearing me, too.
She turned quickly toward the door.
"Belgarath!"
she cried.
"Wait!"
She spun back to Geryon.
"Go after him. Stop him."
That was what Geryon had been waiting for. He jumped to his feet and ran to the door. As he swung it open and was about to call out across the rainy yard, he felt a strange oppression, as if something were almost happening. Almost, but not quite. The shout froze on his lips.
"Go on, Geryon," Silk urged him. "I can't," Geryon groaned. "He's already begun to pull in his will. He wouldn't even hear me."
"Can you help him?"
"I don't even know exactly what he's trying to do, Silk," Geryon replied helplessly. "If I went blundering in there now, all I would do is make things worse."
They stared at him in consternation.
Geryon felt a strange, echoing surge. It was not at all what he had expected, and so he was totally unprepared for it. His grandfather was not trying to move anything or change anything, but instead he was calling out, reaching across some vast distance with the voice of his mind. The words were not at all distinct, but the one word, "Master," did come through quite distinctly. Belgarath was trying to reach Aldur. Geryon held his breath. Then, from infinitely far away, Aldur's voice replied. They spoke together quietly for several moments, and all the while Geryon could feel the force of Belgarath's will, infused and magnified by the will of Aldur, growing stronger and stronger. What is happening? Silk's voice was almost frightened. "He's talking with Aldur. I can't hear what they're saying."
"Will Aldur help him?"
Vordai asked. "I don't know. I don't know if Aldur can use his will here. Not anymore. There's some kind of limitation. Something that he and the other gods agreed to." Then the strange conversation ended, and Geryon felt Belgarath's will mounting, gathering itself. "He's begun," Geryon said in a half-whisper. "His power is still there?" Silk asked. Geryon nodded. "As strong as ever?" "I don't know. There's no way to measure it." The tension of it grew until it was almost intolerable. What Belgarath was doing was at once very subtle and very profound. There was no rushing surge or hollow echo this time. Instead, Geryon felt an odd, tingling whisper as the old man's will was unleashed with agonizing slowness. The whisper seemed to be saying something over and over, something Geryon could almost understand, but which tantalizingly eluded him. Outside, the young fenlings stopped their game. The ball dropped unnoticed as the players all stood, listening intently. Poppy and Tupik, returning hand in hand from their swim, froze in their tracks and stood with their heads cocked as Belgarath's whisper spoke gently to them, reaching down into their thoughts, murmuring, explaining, teaching. Then their eyes widened, as if in sudden understanding. Belgarath emerged, finally, from the misty willows, his step heavy, weary. He walked slowly toward the house, stopping just outside to look intently at the stunned faces of the fenlings gathered in the dooryard. He nodded then, and came back inside. His shoulders were slumped with exhaustion, and his white-bearded face seemed drained.
"Are you all right?"
Vordai asked him, her tone no longer neutral. He nodded and sank into a chair by the table.
"It's done,"
he said shortly. Vordai looked at him, and her eyes narrowed suspiciously.
"No tricks, Vordai. And I'm too tired to try to lie to you. I have paid your price. If it is all right with you, we will leave right after breakfast. We still have a long way to go."
"I will need more than just your word, Belgarath. I don't really trust you, or any human for that matter. I want proof that you have paid."
But there was a strange new voice from the doorway. Popey, her furry little face contorted with the effort, was struggling with something. She stammered. Her mouth twisted, and she tried it again. It seemed to be the hardest thing that she had ever tried to do. She took a deep breath and tried once more.
Mother?
Popey said. With a low cry, Vordai rushed to the little creature, knelt and embraced her.
Mother,
Popey said again, clearer this time. From outside the cottage there came a growing babble of small, squeaky voices, all repeating,
Mother, Mother, Mother.
The excited femlings converged on the cottage, their voices swelling as more and more of them emerged from the swamps. Vordai wept.
You will have to teach them, of course, Belgarath said wearily. I gave them the ability, but they don't know very many words yet.
Vordai looked at him with tears streaming down her face.
Thank you, Belgarath,
she said in a faltering voice. The old man shrugged.
Something for something, he replied. Wasn't that the bargain?
It was Tupic who led them from the fens. The little creatures chirping to his fellows, however, now had words mixed in with it, faltering, often badly mispronounced, but words nonetheless. Geryon thought for a long time before he spoke, wrestling with an idea as he pushed on his pole. "Grandfather," he said finally.
Yes, Geryon,
the old man replied from where he rested in the stern of their boat. You knew all along, didn't you?
Knew what?
That it was possible that you could not make things happen anymore.
Belgarath stared at him. Where did you get that idea?
Aunt Paul said that after you got sick last winter, you might have lost all your power.
She said what?
She said that...
I heard you.
The old man was frowning, his face creased with thought.
That possibility never even occurred to me, he admitted.
Suddenly he blinked and his eyes opened very wide.
You know, she might have been right. The illness could have had that sort of effect. What an amazing thing.
You didn't feel any, well, weaker?
What? No, of course not.
Belgarath was still frowning, turning the idea over in his mind.
What an amazing thing, he repeated,
and then he suddenly laughed. Well, I don't see what's so funny.
Is that what's been bothering you and your aunt for all of these months? The two of you have been tiptoeing around me as if I were made out of thin glass.
We were afraid the Angarax might find out, and we didn't dare say anything to you because...
Because you were afraid it might make me doubt my abilities?
Geryon nodded.
Maybe, in the long run, it wasn't a bad idea at that. I certainly didn't need any doubts plaguing me this morning.
Was it terribly difficult?
Moderately so, yes. I would not want to have to try that sort of thing every day.
But you didn't really have to do it, did you?
Do what?
show the Fenlings how to talk. If you still got your power, then between the two of us, you and I could have opened a channel straight through to the edge of the swamp, no matter what Vordai or the Fenlings could have done to try to stop us.
I wondered how long it was going to be before that occurred to you, the old man replied blandly.
Geryon gave him an irritated look. All right. Why did you do it, then, since you didn't have to?
That question is rather impolite, Geryon, Belgariad chided. There are certain courtesies customarily observed. It's not considered good manners to ask another sorcerer why he did something.
Geryon gave his grandfather an even harder look. You are evading the question. Let's agree, then, that I don't have very good manners, and then you can go right ahead and answer anyway.
Belgariad appeared slightly injured. It's not my fault that you and your aunt were so worried. You don't really have any reason to be so cross with me.
He paused, then looked at Geryon.
You're absolutely going to insist?
Yes, I think I really am. Why did you do it?
Belgariad sighed. Vordai has been alone for most of her life, you know, and life has been very hard to her. Somehow I have always thought that she deserved better. Maybe this makes up for it a little bit.
Did Alder agree with you? I heard his voice when the two of you were talking.
Eavesdropping is really a bad habit, Geryon.
Oh, I've got lots of bad habits, Grandfather.
I don't know why you're taking this tone with me, boy, the old man complained. All right, since you're going to be this way about it, I did, as a matter of fact, have to talk rather fast to get my master to agree.
You did all of this because you felt sorry for her?
Well, that's not exactly the right term, Geryon. Let's just say that I have certain feelings about justice.
If you knew you were going to do it anyway, why did you argue with her?
Belgariad shrugged. I wanted to be sure that she really wanted it. Besides, it is not a good idea to let people get the idea that you will do anything they ask just because you might feel that they have a certain claim on you.
Silk was staring at the old man in amazement.
Compassion, Belgariad? He demanded incredulously.
From you?
If word of this ever gets out, your reputation's going to be ruined.
Belgariad looked suddenly painfully embarrassed.
I don't know that we need to spread it around all that much, Silk. People don't really have to know about this, do they?
Geryon felt as if a door had suddenly opened. Silk, he realized, was right. He had never precisely thought of it that way, but Belgariad did have a certain reputation for ruthlessness. Most men felt that there was a kind of implacableness about the eternal man, a willingness to sacrifice anything in his single-minded drive toward a goal so obscure that no one else could ever fully understand it. But with this single act of compassion, he had revealed another, softer side of his nature. Belgariad, the sorcerer, was capable of human emotion and feelings, after all. The thought of how those feelings had been wounded by all of the horrors and pain he had seen and endured in 7,000 years came rushing in on Geryon, and he found himself staring at his grandfather with a profound new respect. The edge of the fens was marked by a solid-looking dike that stretched off into the misty distance in either direction.
"The causeway," Silk told Geryon, pointing at the dike. "It is part of the Tonedran highway system."
Belgariad?
Tupik said, his head popping up out of the water beside the boat.
Thank you.
Oh, I rather think you'd have learned to talk eventually anyway, Tupik. You were very close to it, you know.
Maybe, maybe not. Want to talk. Talk different? Not same?
Soon you'll learn to lie, Silk told him sardonically. And then you'll be as good as any man alive.
Why don't you talk if only to lie?
Tupik asked, puzzled.
It will come to you, in time.
Tupic frowned slightly, and then his head slipped under the water. He came up one more time, some distance away from the boat.
Goodbye,
He called to them.
Tupic thanks you. For Mother.
Then, without a ripple, he disappeared.
What a strange little creature.
Belgarath smiled. With a startled exclamation, Silk frantically dug into his pocket. Something a pale green color leaped from his hand to plop into the water. "What's the matter?" Geryon asked him. Silk shuddered.
The little monster put a frog in my pocket. And perhaps it was meant as a gift, Belgarath suggested. A frog? Then again, perhaps it wasn't. Belgarath grinned. It's a little primitive, perhaps, but it might just be the beginnings of a sense of humor.
There was a Tolnedran hostel a few miles up the great causeway that ran north and south through the eastern edge of the fens. They reached it in the late afternoon and purchased horses at a price that made Silk wince. The following morning they moved out at a canter in the direction of Boktor. The strange interlude in the fens had given Geryon a great deal to think about. He began to perceive that compassion was a kind of love, broader, more encompassing than the somewhat narrow idea he had previously had of the emotion. The word love seemed, as he thought more deeply about it, to include a great number of things that at first glance did not seem to have anything whatsoever to do with it. As his understanding of this grew, a peculiar notion took hold of his imagination. His grandfather, the man they called Eternal, had probably in his 7,000 years developed a capacity for love beyond the ability of other men even remotely to guess. In spite of that gruff, irritable exterior, Belgarath's entire life had been an expression of that transcendent love. As they rode, Geryon glanced often at that strange old man, and the image of the remote, all-powerful sorcerer, towering above the rest of humanity, gradually faded. He began to see the real man behind the image, a complicated man, to be sure, but a very human one. 2 days later, in clearing weather, they reached Boktor. Chapter 20. There was an open quality about Boktor that Geryon noticed immediately as they rode through its broad streets. The houses were not, for the most part, over 2 stories high, and they were not jammed up against each other as they were in other cities. The avenues were wide and straight, and there was a minimum of litter in them. He commented on that as they rode along a spacious tree-lined boulevard. "Boktor is a new city," Silk explained, "at least relatively." "I thought that it's been here since the time of Drasbolnek." "Oh, it has," Silk replied. "But the old city was destroyed by the Angaraks when they invaded 500 years ago." "I had forgotten that," Geryon admitted. "After Vomimbre, when the time came to rebuild, it was decided to take advantage of the chance to start over," Silk continued. He looked about rather distastefully. "I don't really like Boktor. There aren't enough alleys and back streets. It's almost impossible to move around without being seen." He turned to Belgarath. "That reminds me of something, by the way. It probably wouldn't be a bad idea to avoid the central marketplace. I am rather well known here, and there is no point in letting the whole city know that we have arrived." "Do you think we'll be able to slip through unnoticed?" Geryon asked him. "In Boktor?" Silk laughed. "Of course not. We have already been identified a half-dozen times. Spying is a major industry here. Boran knew we were coming before we'd even entered the city." He glanced up at a second-floor window, and his fingers flickered a quick rebuke in the gestures of the Drasnian secret language. The curtain at the window gave a guilty little twitch. "Just too clumsy," he observed with profound disapproval. "Must be a first-year student at the academy." "Probably nervous about seeing a celebrity," Belgarath suggested. "You are, after all, something of a legend, Silk." "Well, there's still no excuse for sloppy work," Silk said. "If I had time, I would stop by the academy and have a talk with the headmaster about it." He sighed then. The quality of student work has definitely gone downhill since they discontinued the use of the whipping post." "The what?" Geryon exclaimed. "In my day, a student who was seen by the person he was assigned to watch was flogged," Silk told him. "Flogging's a very effective teaching technique, Geryon." Just ahead of them, a door to the large house opened, and a dozen uniformed pikemen marched out into the street, halted, and turned to face them. The officer in charge came forward and bowed politely. "Prince Keldar," he greeted Silk. "Her Highness wonders if you would be so good as to stop by the palace." "You see," Silk said to Geryon, "I told you she knew we were here." He turned toward the officer. "Just out of curiosity, Captain, what would you do if I told you that we did not feel like being so good as to stop by the palace?" "I would probably have to insist," the captain replied. "I rather thought you might feel that way about it." "Are we under arrest?" Geryon asked nervously. "Not precisely, Your Majesty," the captain answered. "Queen Thorin most definitely wishes to speak with you." He bowed to Belgarath. "Ancient One," he greeted the old man respectfully. "I think that if we went around to the side entrance, we would attract less attention." And he turned and gave his men the order to march. "He knows who we are?" Geryon muttered to Silk. "Naturally," Silk said. "How are we going to get out of this? Won't Queen Thorin just ship us all back to Riva?" "We will talk to her," Belgarath said. "Thorin has got a good sense. I'm sure we can explain this to her." "Unless Polgar has been issuing ultimatums," Silk added. "She does that when she gets angry, I've noticed." "We will see." Queen Thorin was even more radiantly lovely than ever. Her slimness made it obvious that the birth of her first child had already occurred. Motherhood had brought a glow to her face and a look of completion to her eyes. She greeted them fondly as they entered the palace, and led them immediately to her private quarters. The little queen's rooms were somehow lacy and feminine, with ruffles on the furniture and soft pink curtains at the windows. "Where have you been?" she asked them, as soon as they were alone. "Polgar is frantic." Belgarath shrugged. "She'll recover. What is happening in Riva?" "They are directing the search for you, naturally," Thorin replied. "How did you manage to get this far? Every road has been blocked." "We were ahead of everybody, Auntie dearest," Silk grinned impudently at her. "By the time they started blocking roads, we had already gone through." "I have asked you not to call me that, Keldar," she admonished him. "Oh, forgive me, Your Highness," he said with a bow, though still grinning mockingly. "You are impossible," she told him. "But of course I am," he answered. "It's part of my charm." The Queen sighed. "What am I going to do with all of you now?" "You are going to let us continue our journey," Belgarath replied calmly. "Oh, we'll argue about it, of course. But in the end, that's the way it will turn out." She stared at him. "You did ask, after all. I am sure that you feel better now that you know." "You are as bad or worse than Keldar," she accused. "I have had more practice." "It is quite out of the question," she told him firmly. "I have strict orders from Polgar to send you all back to Riva." Belgarath shrugged. "You will go?" She seemed surprised. "No," he replied. "We won't. You said that Polgar gave you strict orders to send us back. All right. Then I give you strict orders not to. Now, where does that leave us?" "That is cruel, Belgarath." "Times are hard." "Before we get down to serious squabbling, do you suppose we might have a look at the heir to the throne?" Silk asked. His question was artful. No new mother could resist the opportunity to show off her infant, and Queen Porin had already turned toward the cradle standing in the corner of the room before she realized that she was being cleverly manipulated. "You are bad, Keldar," she said reprovingly, but she nonetheless pulled back the satin coverlet to reveal the baby that had become the absolute center of her life. The Crown Prince of Drasnia was very seriously attempting to put one of his toes into his mouth. With a happy little cry, Porin caught him up in her arms and hugged him. Then she turned him and held him out for them to see. "Isn't he beautiful?" she demanded. "Hail, cousin," Silk greeted the baby gravely. "Your timely arrival has ensured that I will be spared the ultimate indignity." "And what is that supposed to mean?" Porin asked him suspiciously. "Only that his little pink highness has permanently removed any possibility of my ever ascending the throne," Silk replied. "I would be a very bad king, Porin. Drasnia would suffer almost as much as I would if that disaster ever took place. Our Gerrigan here is already a better king by accident than I could ever be." "Oh, dear," Porin flushed slightly. "That completely slipped my mind." She curtsied somewhat awkwardly, her baby still in her arms. "Your Majesty," she greeted Gerrion formally. "Your Highness," Gerrion answered with a bow that Aunt Paul had made him practice for hours. Porin laughed her silvery little laugh. "That all seems so inappropriate." She put one hand to the back of Gerrion's neck, drew his head down, and kissed him warmly. The baby in her other arm cooed. "Dear Gerrion," she said, "you have grown so tall." There wasn't much he could say to that. The Queen studied his face for a moment. "Many things have happened to you," she observed shrewdly. "You are not the same boy that I knew in Val Allon."
"He's making progress," Belgarath agreed, settling himself into a chair. "How many spies are listening to us at the moment, Porin?"
"2 that I know of," she replied, returning her baby to his cradle. Silk laughed. "And how many spies are spying on the spies?" "Oh, several, I would imagine," Porin told him. "If I tried to unravel all of the spying that goes on here, I would never get anything done."
"I'll assume that they're all discreet," Belgarath said, with a meaningful glance around at the walls and draperies.
"But of course they are," Porin declared, sounding slightly offended. "We do have standards, you know. Amateurs are never allowed to spy inside of the palace."
"All right. Let's get down to business, then. Is it really going to be necessary for us to go through some long, involved argument about whether or not you're going to try to send us back to Reva?"
She sighed, and then gave a helpless little laugh. "I suppose not," she surrendered. "You are going to have to give me an excuse to give to Polgara, though."
"Just tell her that we were acting on the instructions contained in the Mrin Codex."
"Are there instructions in the Mrin Codex?" She sounded surprised.
"There might be," he replied. "Most of it's such unmitigated gibberish that no one can be absolutely sure one way or the other."
"Are you asking me to try to deceive her?"
"No. I'm asking you to let her think that I deceived you. There is a difference."
"A very subtle one, Belgarath."
"It will be all right. She is always ready to believe the worst about me. Anyway, the 3 of us are on our way to Gorognadrak. Get word to Polgara that we are going to need a diversion of sorts. Tell her that I said to stop wasting time looking for us, and to mass an army somewhere in the south. Make a lot of noise. I want the Angaraks all to be so busy watching her that they don't have time to look for us."
"What on earth are you going to do in Gorognadrak?" Porin asked curiously. Belgarath looked suggestively at the walls behind which the official spies, as well as a few unofficial ones, lurked.
"Polgara will know what we are doing. What's the current situation along the Nedrak border?"
"Tense.
It is not hostile yet, but it is a long way from cordial. The Natraks don't really want to go to war. If it were not for the Grolums, I honestly think we could persuade them to stay neutral. They would much rather kill Murkos than Drasnians.
Belgarath nodded. Pass the word on to your husband that I would like him to keep a fairly tight rein on Anheg, he continued. Anheg's brilliant, but he is a trifle erratic at times. Rodar is steadier. Tell him that what I want in the south is a diversion, not a general war. Elorns sometimes get over-enthusiastic.
I'll get word to him. When will you start?
Let's leave that a bit tentative.
The old man glanced once again at the walls of the Queen's room.
You will stay the night, at least,
she insisted. How could we possibly refuse? Silk asked mockingly. Queen Porin looked at him for a long moment, then sighed.
I guess I should tell you, Keldar,
she said very quietly.
Your mother is here.
Silk's face blanched. Here? In the palace? The Queen nodded.
She is in the West Wing. I have given her that apartment near the garden that she loves so much.
Silk's hands had begun to tremble visibly, and his face was still ashen. How long has she been here? He asked in a strained voice.
Several weeks. She came before the baby was born.
How is she?
The same.
The little blonde Queen's voice was hushed with sadness.
You will have to see her, you know.
Silk drew in a deep breath and squared his shoulders. His face, however, was still stricken. There's no avoiding it, I guess, he said almost to himself. I might as well get it over with. You will excuse me.
Of course.
He turned and left the room, his face somber. Doesn't he like his mother?
He loves her very much,
the Queen replied.
That is why it is so terribly difficult for him. She is blind, fortunately.
Fortunately?
There was a pestilence in western Drasnia about 20 years ago,
Porin explained.
It was a horrible disease, and it left dreadful scars on the faces of the survivors. Prince Keldar's mother had been one of the most beautiful women in Drasnia. We have concealed the truth from her. She does not realize how disfigured her face is. At least, we hope she does not. The meeting between Keldar and his mother, it will be heartbreaking. There is no hint in his voice of what he sees, but his eyes.
She broke off.
Sometimes I think that is why he stays away from Drasnia.
And then she straightened.
I will ring for supper, and something to drink. Keldar usually needs that after he has visited his mother.
It was an hour or more before Silk returned, and he immediately started drinking. He drank grimly, like a man bent on reducing himself to unconsciousness as quickly as possible. It was an uncomfortable evening for Garion. Queen Porin cared for her infant son, even while keeping a watchful eye on Silk. Belgarath sat silently in a chair, and Silk kept drinking. Finally, pretending a weariness that he did not feel, Garion went to bed. He had not realized how much he had depended on Silk in the year and a half he had known him. The rat-faced little Drasnian's sardonic humor and towering self-reliance had always been something to cling to. To be sure, Silk had his quirks and peculiarities. He was high-strung, a complex little man, but his unfailing sense of humor and his mental agility had seen them all through some very unpleasant situations. Now, however, all traces of humor and wit were gone, and the little man seemed on the verge of total collapse. The dreadful confrontation toward which they rode seemed all the more perilous now for some reason. Although Silk might not have been able to help him when he finally faced Torak, Garion had counted on his friend to assist him through the terrible days leading up to that meeting. Now even that slight comfort seemed to have been taken away. Unable to sleep, he tossed and turned for hours. Finally, well past midnight, he rose, pulled his cloak about him, and padded on stockinged feet to see if his friend had made it to bed. Silk had not. He still sat in the same chair. His tankard, unnoticed, had spilled, and he sat with his elbows in a puddle of ale and his face in his hands. Not far away, her face unreadable, sat the weary little blonde queen of Drasnia. As Geryon watched from the doorway, a muffled sound came from between Silk's hands. With a gentle, almost tender expression, Queen Porin rose, came around the table, and put her arms about his head, drawing him to her. With a despairing cry, Silk clung to her, weeping openly like a hurt child. Queen Porin looked across the little man's shaking head at Geryon. Her face quite clearly revealed that she was aware of Silk's feelings for her. Her look was one of helpless compassion for this man of whom she was fond, but not in the way he wished, and combined with that was a deep sympathy for the suffering his visit with his mother had caused him. Silently, Geryon and the Queen of Drasnia stood looking at each other. Speech was unnecessary. They both understood. When at last Porin did speak, her tone was curiously matter-of-fact. "I think that you can put him to bed now. Once he is able to cry, the worst is usually over." The next morning they left the palace and joined an eastbound caravan. The Drasnian moors beyond Boktor were desolate. The north caravan route wound through low, rolling hills, covered with sparse vegetation and scanty grass. Although it was the middle of spring, there seemed to be a sere quality to the moors, as if the seasons only lightly touched them. The wind, sweeping down from the polar ice, still had the smell of winter in it. Silk rode in silence, his eyes on the ground, though whether from grief or from the after-effects of the ale he had drunk, Geryon could not guess. Belgariad was also quiet, and the three of them rode with only the sound of the harness bells of a Drasnian merchant's mules for companionship. About noon, Silk shook himself and looked around, his eyes finally alert, though still a bit bloodshot. "Did anybody think to bring something to drink?" he asked. "Didn't you get enough last night?" Belgariad replied. "That was for entertainment. What I need now is something therapeutic." "Water?" Geryon suggested. "I am thirsty, Geryon, not dirty." "Here." Belgariad handed the suffering man a wineskin. "But don't overdo it." "Trust me," Silk said, taking a long drink. He shuddered and made a face. "Where did you buy this?" he inquired. "It tastes like somebody's been boiling old shoes in it." "You don't have to drink it." "No, but I'm afraid I do." Silk took another drink, then restoppered the wineskin and handed it back. He looked sourly around at the moors. "Hasn't changed much," he observed. "Drasnia has very little to recommend it, I'm afraid. It's either too wet or too dry." He shivered in the chilly wind. "Are either of you aware of the fact that there is nothing between us and the pole to break the wind but an occasional stray reindeer?" Geryon began to relax. Silk's sallies and comments grew broader and more outrageous as they rode through the afternoon. By the time the caravan stopped for the night, he seemed to be almost his old self again. Chapter 21. The caravan wound its slow way through the dreary moors of eastern Drasnia, with the sound of mule bells trailing mournfully behind it. Sparse patches of heath, which had but lately begun to bloom with tiny pink flowers, dotted the low, rolling hills. The sky had turned cloudy, and the wind, seemingly perpetual, blew steadily out of the north. Geryon found his mood growing as sad and bleak as the moors around him. There was one inescapable fact which he no longer could hide from himself. Each mile, each step, brought him closer to Meloria, and closer to his meeting with Torak. Even the whispered song of the orb, murmuring continually in his ears from the pommel of the great sword strapped to his back, could not reassure him. Torak was a god, invincible, immortal, and Geryon, not even yet full-grown, was quite deliberately trekking to Meloria to seek him out and to fight him to the death. Death was a word Geryon tried very hard not to think about. It had been a possibility once or twice during their long pursuit of Zedar and the orb, but now it seemed a certainty. He would meet Torak alone. Mandoralan or Barak or Hetar could not come to his aid with their superior skill at swordsmanship. Belgarath or Antpal could not intercede for him with sorcery. Silk would not be able to devise some clever ruse to allow him to escape. Titanic and enraged, the dark god would rush upon him eager for blood. Geryon began to fear sleep, for sleep brought nightmares, which would not go away, and which haunted his days, making each worse than the last. He was afraid. The fear grew worse with each passing day, until the sour taste of it was always in his mouth. More than anything, he wanted to run, but he knew that he could not. Indeed, he did not even know any place where he could run to. There was no place in all the world for him to hide. The gods themselves would seek him out if he tried, and sternly drive him to that awful meeting which had been fated to take place since the beginning of time. And so it was that, sick with fear, Geryon rode to meet his fate. Belgarath, who was not always asleep when he seemed to doze in his saddle, watched shrewdly, waiting until Geryon's fear had reached its peak before he spoke. Then, one cloudy morning, when the lead-gray sky was as dreary as the moors around them, he pulled his horse in beside Geryon's. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked calmly. "What's the point, grandfather?" "It might help." "Nothing's going to help. He's going to kill me."
"If I thought it was that inevitable, I would not have let you start on this journey."
"How can I possibly fight with a god?"
"Bravely," was the unhelpful reply. "You have been brave at some pretty inappropriate times in the past. I don't imagine you've changed all that much."
"I'm so afraid, grandfather," Geryon confessed, his voice anguished. "I think I know how Mandoralan felt now. The fear is so awful that I can't live with it."
"You are stronger than you think you are. You can live with it, if you have to."
Geryon brooded about that. It did not seem to help much. "What's he like?" he asked, suddenly filled with a morbid curiosity.
"Who?"
"Torak."
"Arrogant. I never cared for him much."
"Is he like Tochuk? Or Ashrak?"
"No. They tried to be like him. They didn't succeed, of course, but they tried. If it's any help to you, Torak's probably as much afraid of you as you are of him. He knows who you are. When you meet him, he isn't going to see a Sindarian scullery boy named Geryon. He is going to see Belgariad, the Raven King. And he is going to see Reva's sword thirsting for his blood. He is also going to see the Orb of Aldur, and that will probably frighten him more than anything."
"When was the first time you met him?" Geryon suddenly wanted the old man to talk, to tell stories as he had so long ago. Stories somehow always helped. He could lose himself in a story, and for a little while it might make things bearable. Belgarath scratched at his short white beard.
Let's see. I think the first time was in the Vale. It was a very long time ago. The others had gathered there, Belzidar, Belden, all the rest, and each of us was involved in his own studies. Our master had withdrawn into his tower with the orb, and sometimes months would pass during which we didn't see him. Then one day a stranger came to us. He seemed to be about the same height as I, but he walked as if he were 1,000 feet tall. His hair was black, and his skin was very pale. He had, as I remember, greenish-colored eyes. His face was beautiful to the point of being pretty, and his hair looked as if he spent a lot of time combing it. He appeared to be the kind of person who always has a mirror in his pocket.
Did he say anything?
Oh, yes. He came up to us and said, "I would speak with my brother thy master." And I definitely didn't care for his tone. He spoke as if we were servants. It's a failing he has always had. Still, my master had, after a great deal of trouble, taught me at least a few manners. "I shall tell my master you have come," I told him as politely as I could manage. "That is not needful, Belgarath," he told me in that irritatingly superior tone of his. "My brother knows that I am here."
How did he know your name, grandfather?
Belgarath shrugged. "I never found that out. I assume that my master had communicated with him and the other gods from time to time, and told them about us. At any rate, I led this over-pretty visitor to my master's tower. I didn't bother to speak to him along the way. When we got there, he looked me straight in the face and said, 'A bit of advice for thee, Belgarath, by way of thanks for thy service. Seek not to rise above thyself. It is not thy place to approve or disapprove of me. For thy sake I hope that when next we meet thou wilt remember this and behave in a manner more seemly.' "'Thank you for the advice,' I told him, a bit tartly, I suppose. "'Will you require anything else?' "'Thou art pert, Belgarath,' he said to me. 'Perhaps one day I shall give myself leisure to instruct thee in proper behavior.' And then he went into the tower. As you can see, Torak and I got off on the wrong foot right at the very beginning. I did not care for his attitude, and he didn't care for mine."
What happened then? Garian's curiosity had begun to quiet the fear somewhat.
"Oh, you know the story. Torak went up into the tower and spoke with Aldur. One thing led to another, and finally Torak struck my master and stole the orb."
The old man's face was bleak.
"The next time I saw him, he was not nearly so pretty,"
he continued with a certain grim satisfaction.
"That was after the orb had burned him, and he had taken to wearing a steel mask to hide the ruins of his face."
Silk had drawn closer and was riding with them, fascinated by the story.
"What did you all do then? After Torak stole the orb, I mean?" "Our master sent us to warn the other gods," Belgarath replied. "I was supposed to find Balar. He was in the north someplace, carousing with his Elons. Balar was a young god at the time. Rather enjoyed the diversions of the young Elon girls. They used to dream about being visited by him, and he tried to make as many dreams come true as he possibly could. So I've been told."
I never heard that about him. Silk seemed startled.
Perhaps it's only gossip, Belgariad admitted.
Did you find him?
It took me quite a while. The shape of the land was different then. What is now Belgariad stretched all the way to the east, thousands of leagues of open grassland. At first it took the shape of an eagle, but that didn't work out too well.
It seems quite suitable, Silk observed.
Heights make me giddy, the old man replied. And my eyes were continually getting distracted by things on the ground. I kept having this overpowering urge to swoop down and kill things. The character of the forms we assume begin to dominate our thinking after a while, and although the eagle is quite splendid-looking, he's really a very stupid bird. Finally, I gave that idea up and chose the form of the wolf instead. It worked out much better. About the only distraction I encountered was a young she-wolf who was feeling frolicsome.
There was a slight tightening about his eyes as he said it, and his voice had a peculiar catch in it.
Belgariad!
Silk actually sounded shocked.
Oh, don't be so quick to jump to conclusions, Silk. I considered the morality of the situation. I realized that being a father is probably all well and good, but that a litter of puppies might prove embarrassing later on. I resisted her advances, even though she persisted in following me all the way to the north, where the bear god dwelt with his Elons.
He broke off and looked out at the gray-green moors, his face unreadable. Geryon knew that there was something the old man was not saying, something important.
Anyway, Belgariad continued, Bela accompanied us back to the Vale, where the other gods had gathered. They held a council, decided that they'd have to make war on Torak and his Angarax. That was the start of it all. The world has never been the same since.
What happened to the wolf? Geryon asked, trying to pin down his grandfather's peculiar evasion.
She stayed with me, Belgariad replied calmly. She used to sit for days on end in my tower watching me. She had a curious turn of mind, and her comments were frequently a trifle disconcerting.
Comments? Silk asked. She could talk.
In the manner of the wolf, you understand. I learned how they speak during our journey together. It is really a rather concise and often quite beautiful language. Wolves can be eloquent, even poetic, once you get used to having them speak to you without words.
How long did she stay with you?
Quite a long time. I remember that I asked her about that once. She answered with another question. It was an irritating habit of hers. She just said, "What is time to a wolf?" I made a few calculations and found out that she had been with me for just over 1,000 years. I was a bit amazed by that, but she seemed indifferent to the fact. Wolves live as long as they choose to live, was all that she said. Then one day I had to change my form for some reason or another. I forget exactly why. She saw me do it, and that was the end of any peace for me. She just said, "So that's how you do it," and promptly changed herself into a snowy owl. She seemed to take a great delight in startling me. I never knew what shape I'd see when I turned around. She was fondest of the owl, though. A few years after that she left me. I was rather surprised to find that I missed her. We had been together for a very long time.
He broke off, and once again he looked away. Did you ever see her again?
Belgariad nodded. Oh, she saw to that, though I didn't know it at the time. I was running an errand for my master somewhere to the north of the Vale,
and I came across a small, neatly thatched cottage in a grove of trees by a small river. A woman named Poledra lived in the cottage. A woman with tawny hair and curiously golden eyes. We grew to know each other, and eventually we married. She was Polgra's mother, and Beldaran's.
You were saying that you met the wolf again,
Geryon reminded him. You don't listen too well, Geryon, the old man said, looking directly at his grandson. There was a deep and ancient injury in his eyes, a hurt so great that Geryon knew it would be there for as long as the old man lived.
You don't mean...
It took me a while to accept it myself, actually. Poledra was very patient and very determined. When she found out that I could not accept her as a mate in the form of a wolf, she simply found a different shape. She got what she wanted in the end. He sighed then.
Aunt Paul's mother was a wolf?
Geryon was stunned. No, Geryon, Belgarath replied calmly. She was a woman. A very lovely woman. The change of shape is absolute.
But she started out as a wolf?
So?
But
the whole notion was somehow shocking to him. Don't let your prejudices run away with you, Belgarath told him.
Geryon struggled with the idea. It seemed monstrous somehow. I'm sorry, he said finally. It's unnatural, no matter what you say.
Geryon, the old man reminded him with a pained look. Just about everything we do is unnatural. Moving rocks with your mind is not the most natural thing in the world if you stop and think about it.
But this is different, Geryon protested. Grandfather, you married a wolf, and the wolf had children. How could you do that?
Belgarath sighed and shook his head. You're a very stubborn boy, Geryon. It seems that you are never going to understand until you have been through the experience. Let's go over behind that hill. I will show you how it's done. There's no point in upsetting the rest of the caravan.
Mind if I come along? Silk asked, his nose twitching with curiosity.
Might not be a bad idea, Belgarath agreed. You can hold the horses. Horses tend to panic in the presence of wolves.
They rode away from the caravan track under the leaden sky and circled around behind a low heath-covered hill.
As this should do, Belgarath decided,
reining in and dismounting in a shallow swale just behind the hill. The swale was covered with new grass, green with spring.
The whole trick is to create the image of the animal in your mind, Belgarath explained. Down to the last detail. Then you direct your will inward upon yourself, and then change, fitting yourself into the image.
Geryon frowned, not understanding.
It's going to take too long if I have to explain it in words, Belgarath said. Here, watch, and watch with your mind as well as your eyes.
Unbidden, the shape of the great grey wolf he had seen on occasion before came into Geryon's mind. He could clearly see the grey-shot muzzle and the silver ruff. Then he felt the surge, and heard the hollow roaring sound in his mind. For an instant, the image of the wolf curiously mingled with an image of Belgarath himself, as if the two were trying to both occupy the same space. Then Belgarath was gone, and only the wolf remained. Silk whistled, then took a firmer grip on the reins of their startled horses. Belgarath changed back again to an ordinary-looking old man in a rust-brown tunic and grey hooded cloak.
"Do you understand?" he asked Geryon.
"I think so," Geryon replied, a bit dubiously.
"Try it. I'll lead you through it, one step at a time."
Geryon started to put a wolf together in his mind.
And don't forget the toenails, Belgarath told him. They may not look like much, but they are very important.
Geryon put the toenails in.
Tail's too short.
Geryon fixed that.
That's about right. Now, fit yourself into it.
Geryon put his will to it. Change, he said. It seemed almost as if his body had grown somehow fluid, shifting, altering, flowing into the image of the wolf that he had imagined in his mind. When the surge was gone, he sat on his haunches, panting. He felt very strange.
Stand up. Let's have a look at you, Belgarath told him.
Geryon rose and stood on all four paws. His tail felt extremely peculiar.
You made the hind legs a bit too long, Belgarath noted critically.
Geryon started to object that it was the first time he had ever done it, but his voice came out in a peculiar series of whines and yelps.
Oh, stop that, Belgarath growled. You sound like a puppy. Change back.
Geryon did that.
Where do your clothes go? Silk asked curiously. They are with us, Belgarath replied. But at the same time they're not. It's kind of hard to explain, actually. Belden tried to work out exactly where the clothes were once. He seems to think he's got the answer. But I never understood the whole theory. Belden's quite a bit more intelligent than I am, and his explanations are sometimes a bit exotic. At any rate, when we return to our original shape, our clothing is always just as it was.
Even Geryon's sword? Silk asked. And the orb? The old man nodded.
Is it not sort of dangerous, having it floating around out there, unattached, so to speak? It isn't really unattached. It's still there. But at the same time it's not.
I'll take your word for it, Silk conceded dubiously.
Try it again, Geryon, Belgarath suggested.
Geryon switched back and forth several times until his wolf shape satisfied his grandfather.
Stay with the horses, the old man told Silk. We'll be back in a little bit.
He flickered and shimmered into the great gray wolf.
Let's run for a bit, he said to Geryon.
The meaning of what he said was conveyed directly from his mind to Geryon's, aided only slightly by expressions and positions of his head and ears, and a few brief barking sounds. Geryon suddenly understood why the bond of the pack was so strong in wolves. Quite literally, they inhabited each other's minds. What one saw, they all saw. What one felt, they all felt. "Where do we run to?" Geryon asked, not really surprised at how easily the speech of wolves came to him.
"No place in particular. I just need to stretch out a few kinks."
And the gray wolf bounded away with astonishing speed. The tail was a definite problem at first. Geryon kept forgetting that it was there, and its swishing back and forth kept jerking him off balance. By the time he got the hang of it, the old wolf was far out ahead of him on the gray-green moors. After a while, however, Geryon found himself literally flying across the ground. His paws scarcely seemed to touch the earth as he bunched and stretched his body in great bounds. He marveled at the economy of the running gait of the wolf. He ran not with his legs alone, but with his entire body. He became quite certain that, if need be, he could run for days without tiring. The rolling moors were different somehow. What had seemed as desolate and empty as the dead sky overhead was suddenly teeming with life. There were mice and burrowing squirrels in scrubby brown thickets. Rabbits, petrified with fright, watched him as he loped by with his toenails digging into the springy turf. Silently he exulted in the strength and freedom of his new body. He was the lord of the plain, and all creatures gave way to him. And then he was not alone. Another wolf ran beside him, a strangely insubstantial-looking wolf that seemed to have a bluish flickering light playing about her. "And how far will you run?" she asked him in the manner of wolves. "We can stop if you'd like," Geryon replied politely, dropping back into a lope and then a trot. It is easier to talk if one is not running, she agreed. She stopped and dropped to her haunches. Geryon also stopped. You're Poledra, aren't you? He asked it very directly, not yet accustomed to the subtleties of the language of wolves. Wolves have no need of names, she sniffed. He used to worry about that too. It was not exactly like the voice that had been in his mind since his childhood. He didn't actually hear her, but instead he seemed to know exactly what she wanted to say to him. Grandfather, you mean? Who else? Men seem to have a need to classify things, put names on them. I think they overlook some very important things that way. How is it that you are here? Aren't you, well, dead, you mean? Oh, don't be afraid of the word. It is only a word, after all. I suppose I am, though. It doesn't really feel all that much different. Doesn't somebody have to do something to bring you back? Like what Aunt Paul did that time when we were fighting with Groll in the mountains of Olgo? It is not entirely necessary. I can be summoned that way, but I can manage it myself if I have to. She looked at him quizzically. You're really confused by all of this, aren't you? All of what? Everything. Who you are, who we are, what you have to do. A little. Let me see if I can explain it. Take him, for instance. I never really saw him as a man, you know. There is something decidedly wolfish about him. I always rather thought that his being born in man-shape had been a mistake of some kind. Maybe it was because of what he had to do. The shape doesn't really matter, though. It doesn't? Did you really think it did? She almost seemed to laugh. Here, let me show you. Let's change. She shimmered into air and was standing before him then in the form of a tawny-haired woman with golden eyes. Her gown was a very plain one, and brown. Geryon shrugged himself back into his natural form. Am I really any different, Belgariad? She asked him. Am I not who I am, whether as wolf, or owl, or woman? And then he understood. May I call you grandmother? He asked her, a bit embarrassed. If it makes you happy, she replied. It is a bit inaccurate, though. I know. But I feel a little more comfortable with it. Have you finally accepted who you are? I don't have much choice, do I? But you are afraid of it. And what you have to do. Is that it? He nodded mutely. You are not going to be alone, you know. He looked at her sharply. I thought the Codex said... The Codex does not really say everything that is involved. Your meeting with Torak will be the coming together of two enormous opposing forces. The two of you are really just the representatives of those forces. There will be so much power involved in your meeting that you and Torak will be almost incidental to what's really happening. Well, why couldn't someone else do it then? Somebody better suited to it. I said almost incidental. It has to be you, and it's always been Torak, she said firmly. You are the channels through which the forces will collide. When it happens, I think you'll be surprised at how easy it all is. Am I going to win? I don't know. The universe itself doesn't know. That's why you have to meet him. If we knew how it would turn out, the meeting would not be necessary. She looked around. Belgarath's coming back. I'll have to leave you now. Why? My presence pains him more than you could ever know. Because—" he broke off, not knowing how to say it. "We were closer than others, and we were together for a very long time. Sometimes I wish that he could understand that we haven't really been separated. But perhaps it is too early." "It's been 3,000 years, Grandmother." "What is time to a wolf?" she asked cryptically. "The mating of wolves is permanent, and the grief caused by separation is also permanent. Perhaps someday—" Her voice trailed off wistfully. Then she sighed. "As soon as I leave, change back again. Belgariad will want you to hunt with him. It is a sort of formality. You will understand when you are back in the shape of a wolf." Geryon nodded and began to form the image of the wolf in his mind. "One other thing, Belgariad." "Yes, Grandmother." "I do love you, you know." "I love you too, Grandmother." And then she was gone. Geryon sighed and changed himself back into a wolf. And then he went out from that place to join Belgariad in the hunt.